Hi, everybody. Corrie here. Welcome to the podcast of She Is. And She Is started with the whole sense of when I realized that I had gone through my healing journey and I kept trying to put myself back into the story of the big healing instead of allowing myself to evolve with who I had now become. I am the healer and I was the unwounded healer. And oh, sorry, I was the wounded healer. And I was so going to nail that, and it didn't get nailed exactly. And but we leave it in. These are real. These are true. So, uh, welcome to my podcast. And so I want to start today. I've been started the last session that I did, or the last podcast that I did. I went into talking about the Marys. I teach the goddess within the soul revival that I created, that I work with a group of women who, just truly understand that they have to start making themselves a priority in their lives. They hit that pivotal point when you become an empty nester, or you start going through a change in life, or you just wake up in one day and say, where have I been? Where was I in this journey of life? I've put everyone else first, everyone else came before me, and I really wasn't present. And we become so absent in our own journey that we don't realize that we are actually just existing. And so this is my book. If you're watching a video, you're seeing the book. If not, I'm going to tell you about the book. And so it is called More Than Existing. If you're listening in audio, that this book is called More Than Existing. And it was my journey beyond, the little white lies that we tell ourselves. It was my journey beyond blaming the world and about taking ownership and responsibility for my part, only my part. And so by that, I wouldn't be able to decipher that until I started to know a whole lot more about me. So, more than existing, I will read it exactly as the book tells you. More than existing has been mated as if I've already made it to achieving a level of spiritual growth that has given me a rite of passage to a new life, or better yet, to the life I designed before I arrived. I will speak of myself as if the past I have lived bears no weight into the future I am living, and that my days are not filled with self doubt and fear, but inspiration and unconditional love for the woman I have become. It started with a desire in my heart for the return to something I had yet to feel or experience within this lifetime. Until now, I am done, were the words that would fall over my lips and onto the paper as if it were a staff that had hit the ground and the earth shook. And I was waiting for the waters to part. The truth was, the water fell as tears from my eyes and hit the page like heavy rain, weighted with heavier energy. They hit and splattered all over the words, and as I watched the ink spread, I knew in my heart that this time my words were heard, and with an uneasy feeling, I turned the page and I set out on a journey to discover a life of more than existing. Most of my work that I have done up until this point had been based around more than existing. I am many things besides this book. I am a writer, I'm a creator. Um, I'm a writer, I'm a creator, I'm a spiritual healer, I'm a spiritual and emotional consultant. I help people in their personal lives and also in their businesses. There's many times that as a CEO myself, as a business owner, as a woman who has raised a child, that I can tell you there was times that I had some not defining moments in my own behavior and my own actions. So it doesn't really always give us the right to judge or criticize somebody else on theirs. We have to take a good look at our own actions, our own behavior, and what we are contributing, where we're coming in. And to realize that to more than exist means that we also have to be honest with ourselves. It takes becoming loyal. And so this journey through this podcast and where I am right now is that I just finished writing my fifth book called The Way. And I called Resting the Way, and then I changed it to you don't know, and you don't know what my book looks like until into She Is. And she is the creation. She is the creator. She's the savior. She is the hero. She is dot dot dot. And wherever and whatever that means, once you start to realize, oh, I just want to go home, I am tired, I just want to move, I just want to shift, all those things that we start to say, where am I feel so lost, All of that means that we're so far away from home that we forgot what home was. Your home. This is home. And when you can come home to here, there's a peace, there's a contentment, and you stop being so offended by the world. You stop feeling like you have to be a savior to make everybody hear you, see you, anything. And trust me, I've been on this journey a long time. I've been a little bit of everything. And now I'm really truly finding myself stepping into allowing myself to speak a lot of my truths around my connection with Jesus, God, and the Marys, and many other, right down to my ancestral Mi'kmaq First Nations. And so there's a lot of stories to tell, and I have a lot to tell. The biggest thing that I do and how I show up in my work is that even as a psychic medium, is that I share my stories, my vulnerability, and show my that I've walked the journey, I've been here, and I was the unhealed healer. I was the woman who was out promoting, doing good for myself, building a big business, teaching others in hairdressing, in skincare. I taught many, many things in my life. And I found myself really, truly catching myself acting like I was having a tantrum of a teenager, stomping my feet like I was three, spilling out words that really weren't my truth, that were kind of just to make digs at others, like I was throwing daggers and flames at other people to just be, and it wasn't me. That's not who I am. But what I recognized, it was when I was triggered and by some experiences that had happened in my life that left me being hurt, and I didn't deal with my grief. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about my lessons with the Marys. And when I speak of the Marys, I think of Mary Bethany, Mother Mary, and Mary Magdalene. And I have had a personal one-on-one relationship with Mother Mary. So if you watch the podcast or listen to the podcast prior to this, you will hear of my experience, some of my experiences with Mother Mary and with Jesus. I'm not a woman who sits inside the church. Not that I have not sat inside the church or that I have anything with the problem. I don't have a beef with the church. I love the church, but I also love the beach and I love sitting with the trees. And I love that people have the opportunity in this world, right? In many parts, we don't have it everywhere. That I live in a country where, as of right now, I still have the luxury to be me. Not everybody agrees with it. And the attacks do come. And it's sad that we still judge each other that way. And if I mention that if I call myself a witch, it's amazing how quickly the comments come in. And so um, I do have a relationship that I have written a lot about. So I'm going to share a little bit. This is what I share in the Goddess Within choruses. This is what I do in the Soul Revival when we do the soul retrieval work. And so we start to, put those little zappers on the heart, and we start to awaken your heart so you don't feel numb and you can start to feel again and feel for you and think, I am worth a little bit more than what I'm giving to myself. And sometimes it's not what anyone else is giving to us, it's what we're giving to ourselves. So last week, in my last podcast, I spoke about Mary, and I spoke about the self-absorption, and I spoke about the betrayal and betraying ourselves. This week, I want to talk a little bit about the grief and understanding. Everybody's grief is so different, and everybody grieves differently, and what we're grieving. And sometimes we don't even realize that we're in a stage of grief, and that's sad. That the only way we associate that grief and to know what grief means is that we see it through when we are going through a loss of a loved one in our lives. But you don't realize that when you lose a job, when your children leave, when life changes. For me, one of the biggest griefs that I had was when my daughter is when my daughter got married. And so this takes me back to Mary of Bethany's story. And and they talk about, her washing the feet of Jesus with her hair. And so the story that one of the first stories that I remember, I mean, I've heard lots, but the one that I remember that sticks out in my mind is when I heard, well, she would have had to have been Mary of Bethany would have had to been like a prostitute or something like of that sort to feel so ashamed and so disgraced that she would use her hair to wash the feet of Jesus or be trying to seduce Jesus. And I'm like, or trying to seduce Jesus with her hair. And I'm like, what? Right? It's like that whole thought of, can you imagine that when a woman starts to really believe that people really like not believe, when they hear and witness the experience of being the observer of watching their own selves be shamed, be placed upon a cross themselves on because of the judgment and the words of somebody else. And somebody else built our reputation. And that we don't realize is that, the more that we stay in that story and the more time, the more times we hear it, we start to just shut down and we close down and we start to disassociate with who we are and we become who they say we are without even knowing it. Or we become um, so disassociated that we start, trying to fight for that person. And we're so far away from even being who that good person was that was there all along that you just never know what you're doing to yourself in those times. So when I look at the grief and when I'm exploring grief, is that I want people to honor that your grief is your grief and that you're worthy to have that grief. So what we don't understand is when we are grieving for ourselves, when we are sad for ourselves, we look at every other word to use besides grief because we can't comprehend that we do really love ourselves that much. That when something goes wrong, that we're actually very heartbroken. We hurt the love, right? Love hurts. Love don't really hurt. But it's like, so we get hurt. We get hurt. But what it is that we feel more and more compassion and love for ourselves than ever before. But we don't know how to express it because we don't even know that's the emotion and the feeling that we're having. We don't know that's our experience. And that's sad. That's sad that we are so conditioned that we don't know that what we are experiencing, what we're going through in that moment, what we have happening is actually love. And we feel so much love for ourselves that it hurts because this is the same feeling that you would feel for a loved one. It is the same feeling you would feel for a child. It is the same feeling that you get when you are in somebody else, when you're holding space in somebody else's grief story. And that's exactly what Mary of Bethany was doing. And so she didn't need to justify that. And so the details the details didn't need to be shared. She didn't need to justify the whys. She knew that she was to stand in truth, that she was there to be of service. She was there to be of service to the experience. So those who know truth, or speak of truth, understand that when you speak with truth, when you speak of truth, you are speaking love. So when you learn what it means to walk in grace, to walk in faith, is that what you are doing, you are doing for the highest good. Anything that is not for the highest good, you actually will be trying to justify, or what you don't feel is for the highest good. And so when we look at ourselves, and when we look at ourselves running around, criticizing, judging, trying to defend ourselves, is what we're doing for the highest good? Or what are we missing that we need to do that is of the highest good for us? And so for the highest good of us is to be able to allow ourselves to sit in our situation. So when we leave the grief of another, and we stop trying to fix somebody and we stop trying to repair somebody, or when we know we can do no more but be there when they need us, when we leave the grief of another and we honor our own grief, those who are strong will hold our space just as we held space for somebody else. Compassion is what holding space is. Compassionately sitting there, knowing that the silence in the moment doesn't need to be filled, doesn't need to be an awkward conversation. You don't need someone to come in and tell you what you need to be doing to make your life better in that moment. You need to be able to sit to acknowledge what you are really feeling, because if you don't feel it, you suppress it. So Mary of Bethany could have hidden. She could have hidden away. She could have not done those things and then been carrying a guilt that she shoulda, coulda, woulda after the fact. She heard the call, is what she heard. She heard the call, she answered the call, and she took the judgment, she took the criticizing, she took all of those things, and she knew that that would have to be hers to carry, but not hers to own. Hers to carry, not hers to own. And by not owning it and owning, knowing her why, was that then she wasn't caught in adding on to the grief story. She was able to be able to experience the grief story that she knew she was going to have to witness and observe. And she knew she would have to live through that, but she wasn't compounding and piling up even more by adding in any of the low vibrating energies of the guilt, of the shame, of any of those things. Or all she knew was that she had enough faith in her call, in timing, to really do what needed to be done. The moment that you the moment that you don't do those things and you suppress, when it represses, it comes back up. You have to truly then almost be like a double whammy. So when you lay yourself in your grief, when you allow yourself to sit in your grief, what you're doing is that you're acknowledging your feelings. You're acknowledging what you need to heal. And there is no time. There is no real timing on it. But we also have to look at the decision that we place of how long we stay in misery. There's one thing to go through a lifelong grieving, and I think at some point or some way we're always grieving. We have some level of grief somewhere. We go through a lot of losses, a lot of changes, and we have all different stages and levels of grief that is happening. It's just deciphering what is the big grief, so if we grieve if we grieve the things we need to grieve properly, we'll understand our real pain when it's our real pain there. When it's something so big that it's like that it's grasping us by the shoulders and holding us tight and gripping us in and we can't get out. And then we recognize that it's, losing your goldfish was grief and it hurt. But there is a difference in losing your goldfish and losing someone that you love, but you recognize the feeling and you know what it feels like and you know the emotion. But the length of time that you spend in grieving and the amount of time that you spend in the misery of grieving, the misery of grieving really truly starts to weigh down on us. And so compassion and misery are endless and both look the same, but only one will rise you up. Misery will never rise you. Misery sinks you down. Compassion rise you up. So if you're constantly looking for the misery, you'll constantly be going down. If you look for the compassion or you have compassion for yourself, you're constantly going to be on the rise up. You're going to be constantly every day or every few weeks, you may see a little glimmer of hope. There's always light in the dark. What, what, what and who you rely on when in grief will decide how and when you find or see joy again. So, what and who you rely on when you're in grief. So, when Jesus was in grief, he relied upon his people. When Mary Bethany was in grief, she relied upon her faith. She relied upon her faith and she was doing the right thing for the right reason in faith. She was faithful. She was faithful to the light. She was faithful to love. She was faithful to the compassion. When we look at addictions, when we look at um, cleaning our energy, when we look at freedom, um, when we look at building ourselves back up from misery, we start to really look um, at our understandings of what we have witnessed, where we have seen people lose their confidence, lose their faith, and we see them starting to lose their loyalty to truth. Because once we start to lose compassion for ourselves, we really truly start to lose us. And that's something that when I think of my journey and I think of um, where I had been and I thought I had lost faith, I realized how much faith I really did have. I just didn't allow myself the time to feel sad, to grieve, to go through those experiences. And I always felt like there was something that was missing. I always felt like there was something that was missing. And there was something that was missing. It was me. So every time you go through those experiences and you forget to have compassion for you, or you forget to bring you along, you forget to bring you along through the process, and you start to suppress and you start to hold down. Well, the not true self of you, the shadow self, that's the part of you that starts to come forth because we have resentment, and resentment starts to come in, and anger starts to come in, and frustration, because all we want to do is be understood. All we want to do is to be accepted. But if we're not accepting our own grief, if we're not accepting our own journey, if we are not accepting that we have the ability in us to give ourselves the compassion that we need and the time and space to go through our own healing process, no matter what it is that we become bitter and we start to lose ourselves, or we become a pleaser, or we just don't validate we don't validate that we have that we have this valuable thing called time that is we really need to sit in. I keep getting wanted to channel through a message, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm getting kind of distracted here. I feel like I have a big message that is going to be added on here. So I want to end this part of it with, when you look at Mary of Bethany, and you can argue whether she is Mother Mary, whether she's Mary Magdalene, or she was Mary of Bethany. I separate them for the fact of looking at they all had one common thread. They all had one common thing. And through the eyes of the beholder, we're all the same. And so to me, they're all different, but they're all the same because all the stories are different, and they were all created in the same story, but they were all always carrying they were all always carrying a grief they could not show, a sadness they could not give into until the day that it happened. And when it all happened and when it all came down, they, they really still didn't get to grieve properly until the day that they could go into the dark, till they could be the light in the dark, till they could be that light to be able to be there for the experience of what they call the rising after after being crucified. And they were the lights, they were the bright spot that were there to witness the big light rising up. And so they still were in a grief process, and then it goes right into an excitement. So we spend our lifetime, being sad, but then we get distracted from what we need from, we get just distracted from the journey. And it's people say, oh, you just need to be distracted. You just need to keep busy. You just need to, no, you need to deal with it. And sometimes you need to sit in it. And it doesn't mean you're going to sit in the misery. It means you're going to sit in your truth. Sitting in your misery will lead you beating yourself up. Sitting in your truth will leave you trying to deal with what you need to deal with. It'll be you trying to repair your repair or heal the parts of you that really need the work, and you will not be trying to run away. And so today and every day, deal with what you need to deal with. And to, if you have to be anybody, be a Mary. And that's exactly what I'm always saying. Is that if you can be anybody in the world, be a Mary. Be someone who is doing the right things for the right reason. And they're honoring their grief by doing what they need to do. And there's such a, that vigil that we sit by, and we sit in vigil. We sit in our sacred place, our sacred energy, and we honor the grief, we honor the experience, we honor the person, we honor that person that needs to be honored. And whether you're doing it by being of service or you're doing it by sitting in quiet, either way, you are actually sitting with yourself and you're being present with you, as long as it is about doing the right things for the right reason and about learning what it means to truly walk in faith. And so today and every day, you don't betray you. When you have something to grieve, you give yourself time. And most of all, know the value of the truth and being able to speak that truth and live in that truth. And I hope today's podcast of She Is takes you one step closer to being the creation of your own world. Much, much love. And thank you for being with me.